Hello everybody, John Bradley, your orthopedic physical therapist and also part-time gardener and landscape designer. Most of you know, especially if you've been one of my patients in the past, I love gardening. I love working outside, doing projects, and because of that, I guess I've gotten a reputation over the years as being a go-to source for information about how to garden safely if you're having problems with your back or your neck or your shoulder. And I try to teach people as many techniques as I can when they are my patients and I know they're gardeners to do their gardening safely so that they don't end up with an injury and have to come back and see me. So what I thought I would do today is put together a presentation on some of the most common mistakes that I see people making when I watch people garden. I can walk up and down a street in any neighborhood and watch people, particularly at this time of the year, it's spring and everybody's getting outside. And I see all kinds of things that make me sort of catch my breath and think, oh my gosh, I want to run up and grab that person and just fix them, because I know they're going to end up with a problem eventually. So I want to try to deliver all that information to you, and hopefully you can put it into practice in your gardens and have a really healthy, injury-free gardening season. So there are a number of areas that are vulnerable when we garden, and anybody who even gardens a little bit knows that, if you haven't been doing anything all winter and you go out on a beautiful day like today in early spring and you really attack it for 3 or 4 hours, the next day you get up and your shoulder's sore and your back is stiff and you might wonder, gosh, what did I do? Am I in that bad a shape? Well, you may be in that bad a shape, but you may not be in that bad of a shape. You may have just been not using the tools of a gardener properly. So we're going to go through a little bit of that today. I want to keep this as simple and basic as possible because honestly, if you get too hung up in the details of how do I use this tool and how do I use that tool and how about this tool, John, and how about this one, it can be a little confusing. Honestly, there are very few principles that you have to remember. And I want to give you a little bit of a quick anatomy lesson here that I give to my patients if you were actually coming to see me in the office with an injury. The biggest problem I see is when people are outside working in their gardens, if they're using a shovel or a rake or anything, they tend to bend over, almost like they're going to touch their toes. That type of a bending position, if it's sustained for any great length of time, really creates a lot of stress on the lower back. It's potentially stressful to the muscles, the soft tissues and ligaments in the back. It'll create a lot of pressure on the discs in between the vertebrae. So those of you that already have some problems like arthritis, or you might have a disc problem, or you've had an old back injury, this type of a position is something you absolutely need to avoid. So everything I'm going to teach you today is built around the principle of avoiding this. And sort of as a follow-up to that, if you notice when I bend forward like this, what else bends forward? My head. Believe it or not, I get almost an equal number of patients coming to me who have problems with their neck and upper spine after gardening as I do with their lower back, and I can almost guarantee you it's because their head is bent forward. So we're going to talk about how to position your head a lot better when you garden. So let's just do a little sidebar here. Let's think about sports, baseball, football, basketball. How do you see those athletes position themselves when they're on the playing field or the basketball court? A football player doesn't stand at the line like this, right? The football player stands at the line like this. Their back is nice and flat. This flat back position is what you're trying to maintain when you garden. The same thing for a baseball player. The infielder waiting for the batter to hit the ball is positioned like this, okay? The runner on first base who's trying to steal second, he's not standing at first base like this, ready to run. He's standing like this. That's a position of power. There's a reason why athletes use that position when they're playing. It gives their bodies a tremendous potential to generate speed and force and power. You can't do that if you're bent forward, aside from all the risks to injury that I already mentioned. So let's talk about one of the most common tools that any gardener would use, and that is a standard dirt shovel. So
This is the time of the year when a lot of people will get out there and they'll start turning their gardens over. You know, the garden's been dormant all winter, and it's time to start, you know, clearing off the top, and they'll start turning the soil over, maybe add some fertilizer, some, you know, amendments to the soil to get it ready for planting. So this is what I usually see. I usually see people bent forward like this, putting the shovel into the soil, picking it up, and then twisting to put it over here, or they'll flip it over there out of the way. And that is exactly what you don't want to do, okay? Let's go back, let's review that again. This is the position that I'm seeing a lot of people use when they garden. I want you to start doing this. I want you to start staggering your feet. Get one leg forward of the other, okay? If the soil is soft enough and you don't need to push your foot on the shovel to get it into the soil, if you have this staggered leg position, automatically your back flattens. If your feet are like this, if your feet are parallel together, it's very hard to flatten your back. If you have one foot in front of the other, your back flattens almost automatically. It becomes thoughtless, which is good. At that point, what you're going to do is don't push the shovel into the soil with your arms. Don't do this, okay? Instead of pushing with your arms, I want you to go forward with your legs, like that. There's a big difference. I'm standing here, my back's in a good flat position, but if I push forward with my arms, I feel that in my back. My back muscles actually exerted some effort to do that. However, if I position the shovel, my back is flat, and I simply go forward with my legs, I have a lot more power to push that shovel into the dirt. This soil's nice and soft right now. Not everybody's garden has that. It might be a little drier. You don't want to keep pushing with your arms to get that shovel into the soil. Use the mass of your body. Think about those athletes in that position, how a football player is going to charge forward. They use their legs to move themselves forward. That's what you need to be doing with the shovel. Now, if you need to get your foot on the heel of the shovel to get it in, again, you're going to stagger your leg. Doesn't matter which leg is behind. The other foot is on the heel, and then rather than trying to just push with that leg, use your whole body. I just moved my whole body forward about 3 or 4 inches. I'm using the mass of my body to get it in there. A lot of people think they just want to push straight down like they're hitting an accelerator or pushing something away from them. You have to get your whole body into that. Now your shovel is in the soil. Now it's time to get that soil out of the way. What you want to do is, again, staggered leg position. You'll hear me say that over and over again with so many of these garden tasks, because the staggered leg position immediately sets your back at the right angle. When you pick this soil up, okay, don't move it by twisting. If you need to move this soil somewhere, turn your body in the direction that you want to go, and then place the soil down by moving it forward. Don't move it forward with your arms, move it forward with your body. I'm going to put it back here. So don't do this, do this. Okay? It's that same body movement I used to get the soil out of the ground in the first place. So let's just go through that again. Let's assume I need to use my foot to get the shovel into the soil. I'm going to stagger my legs, both hands up top here. Body weight pushes me forward. Now I'm ready to lift. I'm going to keep my back flat, nice and straight, feet well staggered. I'm going to go down. If it's a large load of soil, I want to get the forward hand fairly low. I don't want to try to pick it up here. The leverage is too difficult. I want to get myself closer to that soil. I want to pick it up. I'm going to turn in the direction I want to throw it, and I'm going to just use my body to deliver it. Now, somebody is watching this right now, and I can guarantee you they're going to say, gosh, that seems like a lot of work, and you're making a mountain out of a molehill.
Well, anybody who's turned a garden over, even a smaller garden like this, you know how many times you're going to do that? Hundreds probably. Every one of those times that you do it incorrectly is a risk. Most of the patients I see with back injuries from gardening, the injury isn't really created from a one-time event. They didn't say, oh, John, the 99th time I put this into the soil, that's when my back went out on me. It was an accumulation of the person doing it incorrectly over and over again over time that caused a lot of fatigue in the muscles, which then were no longer to support, didn't have any more power left to support the spine, and as a result, something happened, an injury occurred. It's more often a very repetitive method of using the wrong technique that causes the injury, as opposed to, oh, it was this one thing I did. So that covers shoveling. Now, you notice here I've got a smaller shovel. And this is something that's very easily obtained. You know, the big box stores sell these. This is basically what's called a nurseryman's shovel. It's shorter. It's almost half the length of a regular shovel, and it typically has a squared blade instead of a pointed one. There are times when you may be working in a very tight space, maybe in the corner of a garden, where using a long-handled shovel isn't going to be useful. If you do a lot of that, this is not a bad thing to have, because what it does is it forces you to get yourself closer to the soil, okay? So this isn't meant to be used like that, where I'm going to be moving a large amount of soil. This might be a situation where I'm going to work in a narrow space and I'm going to be down even lower, okay? And I can push this in, the same technique I used before with my body, and I can move smaller amounts of soil with this, and I don't have the risk of a long handle, which creates a lot of leverage and creates more work for my back. So if you're in a tight space, this works really well. This is also very useful if you're cutting an edge around a garden. If you want to define a vegetable border or a flower border, and you want to cut into the soil as you're defining that, that's why it's made with this very flat square surface. If you're doing something like that, you want to be directly over this, okay? You don't want to be back here. You want to get your body directly over it. Staggered leg position, but feet a little closer together, and the same rules would apply. I'm going to just push my leg down and watch what my left leg does. See that? Watch my left leg here. Watch my knee. I use my body weight to push that shovel down. Most people, when they do this, they will just use their arms. And again, if you do that enough times, you will feel the effect of that effort in your back. Take advantage of the mass of your body when you're doing these things. So those are two really common gardening tasks that I get asked about very frequently, is proper use of a shovel. Now, let's talk about doing work on the ground, because not all gardening is done standing up, right? We like to get down into the soil, get dirty. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is a kneeling pad. Probably one of the cheapest gardening tools you'll ever buy. These are very, very inexpensive. They're plentiful. You can find them anywhere. I encourage people to use a kneeling pad. Number one, it's more comfortable for your knees. But the main reason that I want people to use this is I want people to physically get closer to the ground, okay? I don't want people to be doing groundwork like this. And I see this kind of posture all the time. Again, even though the person might say, hey, my knees are bent. Yeah, your knees are bent, but your spine is bent forward, your head is bent forward. This done for a long period of time recreates almost the identical problems that I discussed earlier when you're standing up using a shovel, okay? So kneeling pad, and you can do this in a variety of ways. You can have one knee down, one knee up. Everybody at some point has a bad knee, right? So maybe that's the knee that you're going to keep up. Or you can have both knees there.
The idea here is I have reduced the distance between my body and the ground. The closer I get to that ground, the flatter I can keep my back. So whether I'm working like this or like this, my back stays nice and flat. Now this is where we get into a discussion about our neck, all right? I said earlier I get a lot of patients who have neck problems associated with gardening. And the reason for that is people have a very strong tendency to let their head hang down. You're looking down here, you're pulling weeds, you're putting seeds in. You know, everybody knows how small the seeds are when you're planting carrots, right? They look, it's like dust. So you're trying to find, where did I put that seed? We have to train ourselves to keep your chin tucked in. Think about your chin pulling in toward your throat, okay? There's a big difference between doing this and this, okay? I can see just as well here as I could there. Your head weighs between 12 and 15 pounds. The farther forward your head falls away from your body, the harder these neck muscles have to work to keep it from falling farther forward. If you can do your best at keeping your chin tucked in so that there's more of a straight line from the back of your head to your tailbone, that is a much safer position for your neck. So keep that in mind. Kneeling pad. Either single leg kneeling or double leg kneeling, keep that chin tucked in. Likewise, when I said earlier, when you're using a shovel, you don't want to be twisting. You don't want to act, if you're working on the ground, as if your knees are glued to the ground. Don't work here and then try to work over here. Take the time, move your pad, and then always have your work in front of you. You don't want to be working off to the side. That, again, places a lot of strain on your back. Now, another big task this time of the year is raking, right? We've got sticks, leaves down from the winter, and what I see, this is great because there are a lot of leaves here, this is super. What I see a lot of people doing when they're raking is this. Notice what I'm doing? I'm raking, right? And I'm not moving my feet. I'm acting as if my feet are glued to the ground. Why do we do that? I have no idea, but we all do it, and we all have to admit that we do it. What I want people to do with raking is I want you to pretend that you're dancing with this rake. If I'm going to move these leaves over this way, I don't want to be getting this rake out away from my body. I want to move my body with the rake. And notice what I'm doing is I am not using just my arms to pull. I'm going to use my body mass as I'm taking these little side steps. This is a lot less fatiguing than standing in one spot and using just my arms. So think about that. Anything you use like a rake or a broom, always keep that in front of your body when you're using it. Don't let it get outside, away from your body. Now, in a very similar manner, everybody knows grass is going to be growing soon. It's time to start using one of these. This is another tool that I see people using improperly all the time, and it is somewhat similar to the use of a rake or a broom. Sounds like somebody's gardening right now over there. So most people, when they use a weed whacker, they will stand in one position and they'll do this. If they're working along a fence line, if they're working along a border, they will stand with their feet planted and do this. That is a recipe for disaster because you're doing all these repetitive twisting motions to your spine, which are potentially stressful. Much like the rake demonstration, keep that weed whacker in front of you. As you're working it in a certain direction, as I move down this border, I'm keeping that cutting head in front of my body at all times. I'm always moving my body instead of my arms. I don't want people to be doing this with the weed whacker. There really should be very little arm movement. It's your body that's doing most of the movement. And the other thing that's important is all of these weed whackers have adjustments. The handles
can be adjusted to move up and down. You have to adjust that handle in such a way that the heavy part, which is the motor, isn't up too high, where your arm's up this way, but it shouldn't be so low that you're reaching. And you have to experiment with where it's a comfortable position. For me, I'm pretty tall. I like to have this at about the level of my elbow, just below my elbow. For me, that works great because I can leverage this against my body as I'm working. So keep that in mind. Using a weed whacker, it's a repetitive activity. It tends to be done very quickly. So it's very important to keep that tool in front of you. Now, some people are going to think I'm crazy, but some gardening involves this thing, chainsaw, right? Now, this is the time of the year that people will clean up their yards, perhaps from storm damage over the winter. Trees are down, limbs are down, and it's not uncommon for me to walk through a neighborhood and I'll hear 2 or 3 of these things running, and I'll see homeowners in their front or backyards working a chainsaw. I can tell you there is no more dangerous gardening tool, if you want to call it a gardening tool, that the average homeowner will ever use other than a chainsaw. It has the potential for great harm. This is not going to be a discussion of the proper personal protective equipment or proper chainsaw technique of actually cutting, but there are so many mistakes people make when they use something like this. Number one, this is not necessarily a happy, pleasant tool to use, okay? It's not the little garden cultivator. This thing is noisy, it vibrates, it has a lot of power to it, and that's what makes it dangerous. So I think people are naturally afraid and tentative when they use a chainsaw if they don't have a lot of experience with it. The chainsaw itself, this is actually a fairly small chainsaw. This is more of what someone would use as a homeowner. The problem with the chainsaw is that depending on the length of the bar, the saw itself is generally never well balanced. There's always a lot of weight on the rear if the bar is short like this, or if the bar is longer, it tends to be kind of tip heavy and it tips down. So there's always a struggle to maintain control. Let's go back to the same discussion I had with you earlier about how to use the shovel properly. Where is the position of power? The position of power is legs staggered, backs flat, and the tool you're using always stays in front of you. Those are those basic principles that we talked about in the beginning. So if you're using a chainsaw to cut up a fallen log, for example, you would want to be positioned cutting so that you have one leg back, one leg forward, okay? And the reason for that is you've got the power in your legs to control the saw. I see a lot of people cutting limbs like this. Their legs are almost straight, and they're reaching out in front of them, largely because they're fearful of the chain. You know, the chain's moving very fast, it's very sharp, so they want to stay as far away from that chain as possible. The farther away that saw gets from you, the more stress it is on your back. It's much better if you have a leg forward, which is still about 14 to 16 inches away from that bar, so you're well in the safe zone there. And if you can get your body physically closer to the power head of the saw, you're going to have much more control. If for some reason the saw begins to bind or the wood pinches and there's a force, if you're standing like this, it'll very likely pull you over. If you're standing like this, you have much more ability to control because you've got your body weight as a brace and a counterweight. Now, I said earlier I didn't want to make this a discussion about safety using the chainsaw, but you would never, ever use any chainsaw without a pair of protective chainsaw pants, eye protection, hearing protection, and if you're doing work overhead, a helmet. So don't even consider using this unless you have that equipment. I can't emphasize that enough. So I could go on and on about gardening because I love it, and I would like to spend all of today out here talking to you folks. But I hope this gives you some idea of the common problems that my patients present me with when they get outside in their gardens and they start working and they have some aches and pains and they talk about what they were doing. most of their problems can be traced to the issues that I just demonstrated for you today. But guess what? It doesn't end there. I know each of you may have a specific situation in your garden, a tool that you are using that I didn't demonstrate here. So I want to give you the opportunity to have a personal one-on-one consultation with me, and we'll do that through the miracle of technology. There's going to be a link below at the bottom of the video here, and if you click on that link, it'll give you instructions about how to send your question directly to me. And guess what? I'm going to respond. I'm going to send you a video, and we're going to have a little discussion about that question and answer it specifically for you. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you find this enjoyable, and most of all, I want you all to be safe and healthy and happy this gardening season. This is John Bradley, your orthopedic physical therapist from Performance Physical Therapy.